The gavel didn't sound like justice. It sounded like a heavy stone dropping into a deep well, sealing off the light. I watched Marne wipe a tear that wasn't real, her hand trembling just enough to convince the judge that my calloused hands, hands that only ever fixed broken engines, were capable of breaking her. In that suffocating courtroom, I realized the woman I married wasn't just leaving me. She was burying me alive to pave her road to paradise. If you've ever felt the cold shiver of a lie destroying your reality while the world watches in silence, stay with me, because the truth has a way of haunting those who try to kill it. The garage door rattled as it rolled down, sealing out the gray dusk of November. Alexander Doherty wiped his hands on a shop rag, the coarse fabric turning black with grease and carbon, but the smell of diesel fuel had long ago seeped into his pores. It was a scent he used to be proud of. It meant work. It meant the mortgage was paid. It meant he was useful. Lately, though, it just smelled like exhaustion. He checked his phone. No messages. It was 7:45 p.m. Marnie's shift at the diner had ended at 4. Alexander walked to his beat-up Ford F-150, the suspension groaning as he climbed in. The drive home was a 20-minute blur of passing headlights and the rhythmic thump-thump of tires on cracked asphalt. He tried not to let his mind wander to the places it had been going lately. The unexplained mileage on Marnie's sedan, the way she angled her screen away when they sat on the couch, the new lingerie he found in the laundry that she had never worn for him. He pulled into the driveway of the small ranch-style house. The porch light was off. The windows were dark. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at his chest. A reflex. Is she okay? But as he unlocked the front door, the panic was replaced by a heavy, dull ache. The house was warm. The television was on, muted, casting a flickering blue glow across the living room. Marnie was sitting on the beige love seat, her legs tucked under her. She was typing furiously on her phone, her face illuminated by the artificial light. She didn't look up when the door clicked shut. "Hey," Alexander said, his voice raspy from a day of shouting over idling engines. He kicked off his boots by the mat. Marnie's thumb stopped. She swiped the screen off and placed the phone face down on the cushion beside her. "You're late," she said. Not a question, an accusation. "Inventory ran long. Told you this morning." Alexander walked into the kitchen. The counters were spotless. No dinner. The stove was cold. He opened the fridge and stared at the carton of milk and a leftover container of takeout from 2 days ago. "I didn't cook," Marnie called out from the living room. Her tone was flat, detached. "That's fine. I'll make a sandwich." Alexander took out the jar of mayo and a package of ham. He looked at his hands. Even after scrubbing with Gojo, the grease lined his cuticles. He felt small in his own kitchen. He walked into the living room, sandwich in hand, and sat in the armchair opposite her. The silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was thick, pressurized, like the air before a thunderstorm. "How was the diner?" he asked. "Fine." Marnie picked at a loose thread on her jeans. She was wearing perfume, lavender and vanilla, strong. She never wore perfume for a Tuesday shift at a diner that smelled like bacon grease and stale coffee. "You smell nice," Alexander said, taking a bite of the dry sandwich. Marnie stiffened. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel, were hard as flint. "I spilled some at the counter. Had to wash up." It was a lie, a lazy one. Alexander chewed slowly, swallowing the bread past the lump in his throat. He looked at her phone, still face down. It buzzed against the fabric of the sofa. Zit, zit. Marnie's hand twitched, instinctively reaching for it. Then she stopped herself. She looked at Alexander, and for a second he saw something terrifying in her expression. It wasn't guilt. It was annoyance. She was annoyed that he was there, annoyed that he was eating a ham sandwich, annoyed that he existed in the space she wanted to be different. "Alexander," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "we need to talk about the house." "What about the house, Marne? We made the payment." "It's not enough," she whispered, her eyes drifting to the dark window, looking at something far beyond their small, struggling lawn. "None of this is enough anymore." Alexander put the sandwich down. He didn't know it yet, but the war had already started, and he was the only one without a weapon. Friday morning arrived with a biting frost that coated the windshields of the neighborhood cars. Alexander was off work, a rare occurrence due to a parts shortage at the shop. The house was quiet. Marne had left for the morning shift an hour ago, leaving behind the lingering scent of burnt toast and that heavy lavender perfume. Alexander decided to be useful. He gathered the laundry, sorting the darks from the lights on the cold linoleum of the utility room. It was a mundane act of service, the kind of thing he did to show he cared without having to say the words. He picked up a pair of Marnie's dark denim jeans, the ones she had worn yesterday. As he turned the pockets out to check for tissues or loose change, a crumpled ball of thermal paper fell onto the floor. He stared at it. It was a small, insignificant white sphere against the gray tile. He shouldn't have picked it up. He knew that. Picking it up was an admission that he didn't trust her. But his hand moved on its own, rough fingers smoothing out the wrinkles. It was a receipt from Garrick's Jewelers. The timestamp was 2:15 p.m. yesterday. Marnie was supposed to be working until 4. The item listed wasn't jewelry for her. It was a charge for engraving caseback. The text below read, "Forever. Yours." Monsieur Alexander felt the air leave the room. He didn't own a watch worth engraving. He didn't own any jewelry. M was Marnie. But who was the yours? He put the receipt in his pocket, a burning coal against his thigh. He needed air. An hour later, Alexander was in his truck, idling across the street from the diner. He told himself he was just checking. Maybe she was there. Maybe she had bought a gift for her father, or a brother she barely spoke to. He was bargaining with reality, trying to sell himself a lie that cost less than the truth. At 11:30 a.m., the diner door swung open. Marnie stepped out. She wasn't wearing her uniform apron. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, a camel-colored trench that looked expensive, tailored. She checked her phone, a smile playing on her lips that Alexander hadn't seen directed at him in years. It was a smile of anticipation. A massive, lifted black Silverado pulled up to the curb. It was clean, shiny, the chrome glinting aggressively. In the winter sun, the window rolled down. Alexander couldn't see the driver's face, just a thick arm resting on the doorframe, a gold watch glinting on the wrist. Marnie didn't hesitate. She opened the passenger door and climbed in, sliding across the seat with a familiarity that made Alexander's stomach turn. She leaned over, and though the tint obscured the details, the silhouette of their heads coming together was unmistakable. They kissed. The truck rumbled away, merging into traffic, taking his wife with it. Alexander sat in his idling Ford, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He didn't follow them. He couldn't. Following them made it real. Following them meant the life he had built, the mortgage, the plans, the vows, was already a corpse. He drove home in silence. That evening when Marnie returned, she found Alexander sitting at the kitchen table. The house was dark, save for the light above the stove. "You're home early," she said. Kicking off her shoes, she looked flushed, happy. "Parts didn't come in," Alexander said. His voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. "How was work?" "Busy," she said, walking to the fridge. "Non-stop. My feet are killing me. I didn't even get a lunch break." Alexander touched the pocket of his jeans, feeling the receipt. "Is that so?" "Yeah. Why are you looking at me like that?" She paused, a carton of orange juice in her hand, her defensive walls instantly going up. "Just tired," Alexander lied. He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized he was looking at a stranger who knew all his secrets. "Just tired, Marnie." So the following Tuesday, Alexander didn't go to the bar after work. He didn't sit in his truck to decompress. He drove straight home, the receipt burning a hole in his pocket, his mind rehearsing the words he had been too cowardly to say before. He wanted the truth. He wanted to hear her say it. When he walked in, the house was unnervingly bright. Every light was on. Marnie was standing in the center of the living room, still in her work uniform, but she wasn't doing anything. She wasn't cleaning, wasn't on her phone. She was just waiting. Her posture was rigid, her arms crossed over her chest. Alexander closed the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the silence. "We need to talk," Alexander said. He pulled the crumpled receipt from his pocket and smoothed it out on the coffee table. "I know about the watch. I know about the guy in the black Silverado. Marne looked at the paper, then up at him. There was no fear in her eyes, no guilt, just a cold, calculating assessment. Like a mechanic looking at a car that was totaled, deciding if it was worth stripping for parts. "You've been spying on me," she said. Her voice was level, almost bored. "I've been living with a ghost," Alexander shot back, his voice rising despite his best efforts to keep it down. "I saw you, Marne. I saw you kiss him. Just tell me the truth. Do you want a divorce? Is that it?" Marne took a step back. She looked at the front window, checking the blinds were open, then looked back at him. A strange transformation took over her face. Her features twisted, not into sadness, but into a mask of theatrical terror. "Stop it!" she screamed. Alexander blinked, confused. He hadn't moved. He was 5 feet away from her. "What? Get away from me! Put it down!" she yelled, her voice shrill, carrying easily through the thin walls to the neighbors. "Marne, I'm not holding anything. What are you doing?" Alexander took a step forward, his hands open, palms up. "Don't touch me!" She grabbed a ceramic lamp from the end table, a lamp they had bought together at a flea market 3 years ago, and hurled it at the wall. It shattered with a deafening crash, shards of pottery skittering across the hardwood floor. Alexander froze. The violence of the action stunned him. "Are you crazy? Stop!" Marne didn't stop. She reached for the heavy glass vase on the mantel and swept it onto the floor. Crash. Then she ripped the collar of her own shirt, the sound of tearing fabric distinct and sickening. She messed up her hair, breathing heavily, hyperventilating on purpose. She pulled her phone from her back pocket. She looked at Alexander, and for 1 second the mask slipped. She smirked. It was a small, tight expression of victory. Then she hit the speed dial. 911, please help me, she sobbed into the receiver, her voice suddenly trembling with a fear that sounded indistinguishable from the real thing. "My husband, he's hurting me. He's destroying the house. Please, I'm scared he's going to kill me." Alexander stood rooted to the spot, his work boots heavy as lead anchors. He watched her pace the room, weeping into the phone, stepping over the broken glass she had thrown. He realized then that this wasn't an argument. It was an eviction. He heard the distant wail of sirens cutting through the night air, growing louder with every beat of his heart. He looked at his hands, his empty, greasy, hard-working hands, and knew that whatever he said when the police arrived, it wouldn't matter. The stage was set, and he was the villain. The red and blue lights didn't just illuminate the living room, they dissected it. They flashed across the shards of the broken lamp and the tear in Marnie's shirt, turning the stage wreckage into a strobe-lit crime scene. When the front door burst open, Alexander didn't resist. 2 uniformed officers entered, hands hovering near their holsters. One was older, tired-looking. The other was young and tense. "Hands where I can see them," the younger one barked. Alexander raised his hands slowly, his grease-stained palms open. "I didn't touch her," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "She threw the lamp. She's lying. Get on. Your knees now." Alexander sank to the hardwood floor. From the corner of his eye, he saw Marnie. She was huddled on the sofa, clutching her knees to her chest, trembling. She looked small, fragile, a perfect victim. She didn't look at him. She looked at the older officer, her eyes wide and wet. He just snapped," Marnie whispered, her voice hitching. "I told him I wanted to leave, and he started breaking things." "That's a lie," Alexander shouted, the injustice of it finally snapping his restraint. "Sir, shut your mouth!" The officer stepped behind him, grabbing his wrists. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into his skin, tight and unyielding. They weren't just metal rings. They were the physical manifestation of his powerlessness. He was hauled up and marched out the front door. The neighborhood was awake. Mrs. Gable from next door was standing on her porch, clutching her robe. The kids across the street were peering through the blinds. Alexander lowered his head, the shame burning hotter than the anger. He was a hard worker. He paid his taxes. He fixed their cars. Now he was the guy in handcuffs. The ride to the station was silent. The back of the cruiser smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. Alexander stared at the wire mesh separating him from the officers, trying to make sense of the last hour. It's a misunderstanding, he told himself. They'll take statements. They'll see there are no marks on her. They'll see the receipt. But at the station, logic didn't matter. Procedure did. He was fingerprinted. His mugshot was taken. A portrait of a man bewildered and broken. He sat in a holding cell for 3 hours until a duty magistrate processed him. "You are being released on your own recognizance," the magistrate said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. "But this is a temporary protection from abuse order. You are to have no contact with Mrs. Dougherty. You cannot return to the marital residence. You cannot go to her place of employment. If you violate this, you will be arrested immediately. Do you understand?" "That's my house," Alexander said, his voice hoarse. "I pay the mortgage. Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not for me to decide, Mr. Dougherty. Just don't go there." They gave him back his wallet and his keys. He walked out of the station into the freezing November night. The wind cut through his flannel shirt. He had no coat. It was back at the house, hanging in the closet he couldn't open. He walked 3 blocks to where the police had let him leave his truck earlier, during the tow assessment that never happened. He climbed into the cab of the F-150. It was freezing inside. Alexander started the engine, blasting the heat, but the chill was in his bones now. He drove to the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart on the edge of town. He reclined the seat, pulling a grease-stained blanket from behind the bench, the one he used when he had to crawl under a chassis in the snow. He stared at the ceiling of the truck cab. The streetlights from the parking lot cast long, lonely shadows across the dashboard. He reached into his pocket. The receipt was gone. The cops had taken it as evidence during the search, or maybe he had dropped it. It didn't matter. He closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. Only the image of Marnie's smirk before she dialed 911 played on a loop in his mind. She had stolen his home. She had stolen his name. And lying there in the cold, cramping cab of his truck, Alexander realized she wasn't done yet. The county courthouse smelled of floor wax and old paper. It was a smell that tried to mask the misery of the people passing through its metal detectors, but failed. Alexander sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tight to stop them from shaking. He was wearing his only suit, a charcoal gray one he'd bought for his mother's funeral 5 years ago. It was tight across the shoulders, restricting his breathing. Next to him sat Mr. Harrows, a court-appointed public defender who smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and looked as if he hadn't slept in a week. Harrows shuffled through a manila folder that looked terrifyingly thin. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Alexander stood. Across the aisle, Marnie sat with the district attorney. She had transformed again. The expensive camel coat and the tailored jeans were gone. Today she wore a modest beige cardigan and a long skirt. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, exposing her neck. She looked defenseless. She looked like a woman who had spent years walking on eggshells. When she took the stand, she didn't look at Alexander. Not once. "Mrs. Dougherty," the prosecutor began, his voice gentle. "Can you tell the court what happened on the night of November 12th? Marnie took a sip of water. Her hand trembled just enough for the judge to notice. "He came home angry," Marnie began, her voice soft but clear in the silent room. He's been tracking my mileage, checking my receipts. He doesn't let me have access to our bank accounts. That night, he found a receipt for a gift I bought my father. He accused me of stealing from him." Alexander's jaw tightened. A gift for her father? It was a lie so bold it took his breath away. "He started screaming," she continued, a tear slipping down her cheek. "He threw the lamp. He said if I tried to leave him, he'd make sure no one else would ever want me. He cornered me against the wall." He raised his fist. "I thought he was going to kill me." It wasn't the first time. A murmur went through the few people in the gallery. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked at Alexander. Her expression wasn't neutral. It was filled with a cold, sharp disgust. "Objection," Harrow said, but it was weak. "Speculation on intent." "Overruled," the judge said, not looking away from Marnie. "Go on." Marnie wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I love him," she sobbed, the sound raw and jagged. "I didn't want to call the police, but I was so scared. He has a temper. He works with heavy tool. He's so strong. I just wanted to be safe. Alexander felt a physical sickness rising in his gut. She was weaving the truth, his job, his strength, his frugality, into a weapon. She was painting a picture of a controlling monster, and everyone in the room was buying it. She wasn't just lying about the assault. She was rewriting their entire marriage. When the cross-examination came, Harrows tried. "Mrs. Dougherty, did your husband actually strike you?" "He threw things at me," Marne said, meeting the lawyer's eyes with steel beneath the tears. "He destroyed our home. The only reason he didn't hit me was because I dialed 911. It was over. The judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to bind the charges over for trial. Terroristic threats, simple assault, and harassment. As the gavel came down, sealing the decision, Harrows leaned in close to Alexander. "Listen to me," the lawyer whispered, his voice devoid of hope. "She's good. She's really good. In this county, with that testimony, you go to trial, a jury is going to bury you. You're looking at 2 to 5 years. They're going to offer a plea deal soon. I suggest you take it." Alexander looked at Marne as she walked out of the courtroom, flanked by a victim's advocate. She paused at the double doors, and for a split second, her eyes met his. There was no apology. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of a transaction completed. "I didn't do it," Alexander whispered to the empty air. "Doesn't matter," Harrows said, closing his briefcase. "In here, the truth is just what 12 people decide to believe. And right now, nobody believes you." If the Motel 6 on the edge of the highway hummed with the sound of ice machines and passing semi-trucks, Alexander sat on the edge of the mattress, the synthetic bedspread scratching against his palms. The room smelled of bleach and stale cigarette smoke, the scent of transience. On the nightstand lay the plea deal paperwork Harrows had given him. Nolo contendere. No contest. 2 years probation, mandatory anger management, a permanent criminal record, and a restraining order that would keep him from ever retrieving his tools or his personal belongings from the house. It was a surrender. It was an admission of guilt for a crime that never happened. Alexander looked at his reflection in the dark television screen. He looked older than 34. The lines around his eyes were deeper, etched by the last week of sleeplessness. If he signed that paper, Marne won. She got the house, the assets, the freedom, and the victim narrative. If he fought it, 12 strangers would likely send him to prison based on her tears. He stood up. The decision didn't arrive with a thunderclap. It settled over him like a heavy coat he had to wear to survive the winter. He went to the small bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. He didn't shave. He wouldn't be Alexander Dougherty anymore, and Alexander Dougherty was clean-shaven. He opened his wallet. He had drained his personal savings account, the one Marne didn't have access to, just before the hearing. $4,000 in 20s and 50s. It was not a fortune, but it was a start. He took his driver's license, his social security card, and his credit cards out of the leather slots. He stared at them for a long moment. The plastic rectangles were the keys to his life, and now they were tracking devices. He dropped them into the metal trash can by the sink. He hesitated, then struck a match from the motel book and dropped it in. The plastic curled and blackened, the smell of burning toxins filling the small room. He packed a single duffel bag, 3 changes of clothes, a heavy work jacket, and a pair of sturdy boots. He left everything else. The drive to the bus station was the longest of his life. Every police car he passed felt like it was hunting him. He parked the Ford F-150 in the long-term lot. He patted the dashboard once, a silent goodbye to the only reliable thing he had left. He left the keys on the driver's seat and locked the doors. Let them find it. Let them think he was close. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights were humming a low, headache-inducing note. The air was thick with the smell of floor cleaner and weary travelers. He walked to the counter, keeping his head down, the brim of his baseball cap pulling low. "Next available to anywhere west," Alexander said to the clerk behind the glass. "Far west." The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and chipping nail polish, didn't even look up. "Got a Greyhound heading to St. Louis, transferring to Denver, then up to Bismarck. Leaves in 20 minutes. "One way," Alexander said, sliding a stack of cash under the glass. "Name?" Alexander paused. The name died in his throat. "Jack," he said. "Jack Miller." He took the ticket. He walked to the boarding gate, his heart thudding against his ribs. When he stepped onto the bus, he didn't look back at the town lights flickering in the distance. He didn't look back at the house he fixed, the woman he loved, or the life he was losing. The bus hissed, the air brakes releasing with a heavy sigh. As the wheels began to turn, Alexander Doherty ceased to exist. In his place sat a man with no history, staring out into the consuming darkness of the American highway. 2 years of North Dakota wind had sandblasted the softness out of Alexander Doherty. Here the landscape was a flat, unending sheet of white that merged with the gray sky, erasing the horizon. It was a place where a man could stand in a field and scream until his throat bled, and the sound would simply be swallowed by the distance. He wasn't Alexander anymore. He was Jack. Jack was a man of few words and heavy hands. He wore a beard that was thick and unruly, hiding the jawline Marne used to kiss. He walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from a slipped wrench on a frozen tractor axle 6 months ago that he'd treated himself with duct tape and ibuprofen because doctors asked for ID. He was currently deep inside the engine bay of a John Deere combine, his breath pluming in the frigid air. The machine had been dead for weeks, but Silas, the old man who owned the ranch, was too stubborn to buy a new one and too cheap to hire a dealership mechanic. "She gonna run, Jack?" Alexander didn't jump. He had trained himself out of the flinch reflex. He slowly wiped a grease-smeared wrench on his coveralls and looked down from the machinery. Silas was standing there, chewing on an unlit cigar, eyes squinting against the biting wind. "Fuel line was cracked," Alexander said, his voice gravelly from disuse. "Injectors were clogged. She'll run." "You're a wizard with this scrap metal, son," Silas grunted. "Most fellas would have told me to scrap it. You saved me 20 grand. Alexander climbed down, his boots crunching on the packed snow. "Just doing the job." Silas studied him for a moment. It was that look, the curiosity, that always made Alexander's pulse spike. "You've been here 18 months, Jack. Never asked for a day off. Never asked for a raise. Never see you go into town for a beer on Friday nights. A young man like you running from a woman or the law?" The question hung in the freezing air. It was meant as a joke, a bit of cowboy banter, but it hit Alexander like a physical blow. Alexander picked up his toolbox. He met the old man's eyes with a flat, dead stare. "I just like the quiet, Silas. Town's too loud." Silas held the gaze for a second, then nodded, sensing a boundary he shouldn't cross. "Fair enough. Pay envelope is in the barn. Cash, like you asked." "Thanks." Alexander walked back to the small, drafty bunkhouse he called home. It was a single room with a wood stove, a cot, and a hot plate. No television, no internet. He had a prepaid burner phone that he kept turned off 90% of the time, used only to check weather reports. He threw the envelope on the small wooden table. He didn't count it. Money had lost its meaning beyond buying beans, coffee, and diesel for the heater. He sat on the edge of the cot and looked at his hands. They were scarred, stained permanently with oil and dirt. They were the hands of a stranger. Sometimes, late at night when the wind howled like a dying animal, he would close his eyes and try to remember the smell of lavender and vanilla. But the memory was souring, rotting at the edges. He wasn't running anymore. He was waiting. He was waiting for the other shoe to drop, or for the silence to finally drive him mad. He was a ghost haunting the plains, a man who had died in a Pennsylvania courtroom so that he wouldn't have to live in a cage. But looking around the empty, freezing shack, Alexander wondered if he hadn't built a prison of his own after all. In Pennsylvania, the rain had been falling for 3 days straight. It was a cold, miserable drizzle that turned the gutters into overflowing rivers of sludge. Inside the master bedroom, Marne stared at the ceiling. A brown, jagged water stain was spreading across the drywall in the corner, looking like a fresh bruise on old skin. Alexander would have been on the roof 3 days ago, she thought. The thought came unbidden, an intruder she couldn't evict. Alexander would have been up there with a flashlight and a tube of sealant before the first drop ever hit the plaster. Beside her, Rick snored. It wasn't a peaceful rhythm, it was a wet, choking sound, smelling of bourbon and cigars. Rick Ballantyne, the man who had promised her trips to Cabo and a life of leisure, had gained 30 pounds in 2 years. The flashy black Silverado in the driveway was now 3 months behind on payments, though he swore it was just a banking error. Marne slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him. Waking Rick before noon on a Sunday usually resulted in a fight about money or a lecture about how she didn't appreciate his stress. She walked into the kitchen. The granite countertops she had demanded Alexander install 5 years ago were cluttered with Rick's mail, empty beer bottles, and fast food wrappers. The house felt smaller now. It felt heavy. She started the coffee maker, but it sputtered and died, flashing an error code. She hit it with the palm of her hand. Nothing. "Damn it," she whispered, the frustration welling up in her throat like bile. "What's with the noise?" Rick's voice boomed from the hallway. He shuffled in, wearing boxer shorts and a stained t-shirt. He didn't look like the landscape tycoon anymore. He looked like a landlord who had given up on his own property. "The coffee maker is broken," Marne said, staring at the machine. "And the roof is leaking in the bedroom. I told you about it last week, Rick." Rick opened the fridge, grabbing a bottle of water. "I'll call a guy. Relax, babe. You're always nagging." "You said you'd call a guy last week. The stain is getting bigger. It's going to mold." "Then call him yourself." Rick slammed the fridge door. "I'm running a company, Marne. I don't have time to chase down handymen for every little drip." Marne turned to look at him. "You're running a company? Is that why the credit card was declined at the grocery store on Thursday?" Rick's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. He walked over to her, crowding her space, using his size to intimidate. It was a tactic he used often lately. "I told you, cash flow is tight in the winter. Landscaping is seasonal. You knew that when you married me. Don't act like a princess now." He grabbed his keys from the counter. "I'm going to the office. I need to think." "On a Sunday?" "Yeah, on a Sunday." Marne watched him leave. The back door slammed, shaking the frame. Moments later, the roar of the Silverado faded down the street. She stood alone in the kitchen of the house she had lied under oath to keep. She had destroyed a man to secure this life. She had sent Alexander into the void so she could have this. She looked around at the peeling paint near the window, the dripping faucet in the sink, the mountain of unpaid bills on the counter. The house was rotting from the inside out, mirroring the secret she carried in her chest. She had won the prize, but she hadn't realized until now that the prize was cursed. Marne walked to the window and touched the cold glass. For the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to feel the crushing weight of her mistake. She had traded a protector for a parasite. The phone rang at 2:14 a.m. It was a sound that sliced through the silent house like a razor blade. Marne woke up with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. The other side of the bed was empty. Rick hadn't come home. She grabbed the phone, her fingers fumbling in the dark. "Rick, I messed up, Marne. I messed up bad." His voice was slurred, thick with alcohol and panic. "You gotta come. Route 19, near the old quarry. Bring your car. Hurry." Marne drove through the pitch-black night, her headlights cutting through the fog. She found the Silverado a mile past the quarry entrance. It was nose down in a drainage ditch, the front grille crumpled against a utility pole. Steam hissed from the radiator into the cold air. Rick was pacing by the side of the road, stumbling slightly. He smelled like a distillery. When he saw Marne pull up, he didn't ask if she was okay. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip bruising. "Listen to me," he hissed, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "I can't take this hit. If I get another DUI, I lose my license. I lose the contracts. We lose the house. Everything goes, Marne." "Rick, you're bleeding," she whispered, looking at a gash on his forehead. "Forget the blood. You were driving," he commanded. "You took the truck to get gas. A deer ran out. You swerved. I was home in bed. You got that? I can't lie to the police, Rick. Not again." "You did it before," he shouted, spit flying. "You did it for yourself. Now do it for us. Get in the driver's seat. Now." Frozen by fear and the terrifying logic of his demand that their survival depended on this lie, Marne climbed into the wrecked cab. The airbag hung limp like a dead lung. She sat there shivering while Rick called 911 from her phone. acting the part of the concerned husband. 3 days later, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by a cold, gnawing anxiety. Marne sat in a small, sterile office at the regional insurance center. Across the desk sat Elena Vance. Elena didn't look like the police officers Marne had fooled years ago. She wore a sharp navy blazer, and her eyes were gray, intelligent, and completely devoid of warmth. She wasn't looking for a crime. She was looking for a reason not to pay out $50,000. "So, Mrs. Ballantyne," Elena said, scrolling through photos on her tablet, "you stated you were driving the 2021 Silverado at the time of impact. Approximately 2:30 a.m.? "Yes," Marne said. She held her purse tight in her lap. "Like I said, a deer ran out." Elena zoomed in on a photo. "It's a heavy truck. Lots of torque. You must have been going fast to crumple the frame like that." "I was doing the speed limit," Marne lied automatically. Elena looked up, her gaze locking onto Marnie's. "Here's the thing that confuses me. The impact data recorder, the black box, registered the driver's seat position at the moment of impact. It was set all the way back, suited for someone about 6'2". Marnie's mouth went dry. Rick was 6'2". She was 5'4". I like to stretch my legs when I drive," Marne stammered. Elena didn't blink. She didn't smile. She just tapped her stylus against the desk, a one-year-dis, rhythmic, predatory sound. "That's unsafe, Mrs. Ballantyne. You wouldn't be able to fully depress the brake pedal. And looking at your medical report, you walked away with minor bruising from the seatbelt, but the steering column collapsed in a way that would have shattered the ribs of someone sitting that close to the wheel, unless they were sitting further back." Elena closed the file folder. "We investigate all total loss claims thoroughly, especially when the policyholder has a history of high-risk behavior. I'll be needing to review your husband's medical records too, just to be thorough, and maybe check some local traffic cams." Marne felt the room spin. This wasn't a standard review. This was a hunt. "Is there a problem?" Marne asked, her voice trembling. "Not yet," Elena said, her voice cool and professional. "But I find that when physics and testimony don't line up, it's usually the testimony that needs to change. I'll be in touch." Marne walked out of the office, her legs feeling like jelly. She had walked into a trap she didn't even know existed. And for the first time, she realized that the lie she told to destroy Alexander was about to collide with the lie she told to save Rick. Elena Vance lived for the details that other people ignored. Her office on the 14th floor of the corporate plaza was dark, save for the glow of dual monitors and the amber streetlights of Philadelphia bleeding through the rain-streaked window. It was 9 p.m. Most of the claims department had gone home to their families. Elena stayed with her files. She took a sip of cold, bitter coffee and clicked through the digital dossier she had compiled on Marne Ballantyne. The car accident claim was already shaky. The physics didn't work. But insurance fraud was often a game of chicken. The company would deny, the claimant would threaten to sue, and the company would often settle to avoid legal fees. Elena didn't like settling. She liked winning. To win, she needed to prove that Marne Ballantyne wasn't just mistaken, she was a liar by nature. Elena minimized the accident photos and opened a background search window. She typed in Marnie's social security number. The results cascaded down the screen. Credit scores declining, previous addresses, and a marriage license dissolved 2 years ago. "Alexander Doherty," Elena murmured, reading the name of the ex-husband. She pulled up the court records from the divorce. It wasn't a standard split. It was messy, a protection from abuse order, charges of terroristic threats and simple assault, a fugitive warrant issued for Alexander Doherty after he failed to appear for trial. Elena leaned back in her ergonomic chair, tapping a pen against her lip. The narrative in the court transcripts described Marne as a fragile, terrified woman who had been cornered by a violent brute. But the woman Elena had met yesterday was sharp, defensive, and arrogant. She had lied about the seat position with the ease of someone discussing the weather. Liars don't start lying overnight, Elena thought. It's a habit. It's a survival mechanism. She opened a new tab. The National Crime Information Center's public interface for missing persons and outstanding warrants. Alexander Doherty was still listed as active. No financial footprint in 2 years. No credit card usage. No driver's license renewal. He had effectively vanished. Or so he thought. Elena opened a piece of proprietary software the insurance firm paid thousands a month to license, a deep web crawler that utilized facial recognition across social media, public forums, and local news outlets. It was designed to catch disability fraudsters playing tennis while claiming back pain, but it worked just as well for finding ghosts. She uploaded Alexander's mugshot from the arrest 2 years ago. The software began to churn, scanning millions of images. While it processed, Elena went back to Marnie's file. She noticed something in the timeline of the PFA hearing. Marnie had claimed Alexander destroyed the house on November 12th, but a credit card statement from a joint account, which had been included in the divorce discovery documents, showed a transaction at a gas station 10 miles away at the exact time Marnie claimed the assault began. "You were filling up the tank while you were being attacked?" Elena whispered. It was a crack in the foundation. A small one, but enough to insert a pry bar. A chime from the computer drew her attention back to the facial recognition search. Match found, 87% confidence. Elena clicked the link. It wasn't a government database or a social media profile. It was a Facebook post from a small agricultural supply store in Marne, North Dakota. The post was dated 3 months ago. "Big thanks to Jack at the Rocking K for fixing our delivery truck in record time. Best mechanic in the state." The photo showed a man in greasy coveralls standing next to a green tractor. He had a thick beard, a baseball cap pulled low, and he looked 20 pounds lighter than the mugshot. But the eyes were the same. The set of the shoulders was the same. And the scar on the left eyebrow, visible in the high-resolution zoom, was a perfect match. Elena smiled. It was a cold, professional smile. Alexander Daugherty wasn't a violent fugitive. He was a mechanic named Jack hiding in the frozen north. And if Marnie had lied to put him there, she had committed perjury. Elena picked up her phone. She didn't call the police. The police were blunt instruments. She needed a scalpel. She needed to talk to the one man who had more reason to destroy Marnie Ballantyne than she did. She booked a flight to Bismarck for the next morning. The insurance claim for the Silverado was about to become the least of Marnie's problems. So the wind in North Dakota didn't howl. It screamed. It was a constant, high-pitched presence that rattled the tin roof of the machine shed, where Alexander was welding a fractured plow blade. The blue arc of the welder hissed and popped, casting dancing shadows against the walls hung with tools. He flipped his mask up, checking the bead. It was clean, strong. Through the dirty plexiglass window, he saw motion. A car was coming up the long, gravel drive. It wasn't Silas's truck. It was a white sedan, a rental. Clean, nondescript, and terrifyingly out of place in a landscape of mud-spattered pickups. Alexander's stomach dropped. The reflex was instant. He killed the torch. He grabbed his heavy coat from the hook. He knew the drill. Out the back door, into the tree line, hike 3 miles to the stash spot where he kept an emergency bag. He was halfway to the rear exit when the sedan stopped right in front of the bay doors. A woman stepped out. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wrapped in a thick wool coat, battling the wind to keep her scarf in place. She didn't look like a cop. She looked like a headache. Alexander froze in the shadows of the workshop. He watched her walk toward the open bay door, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. She stopped at the threshold, peering into the gloom. "Alexander Daugherty?" she called out. Her voice was strong, carrying over the wind. The name hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 2 years. He stepped back, his boots scuffing the concrete. The woman turned her head, her eyes locking onto his silhouette. She didn't reach for a weapon. She raised her empty hands. "I'm not the police," she said, taking a step inside. "My name is Elena Vance. I'm an insurance investigator. I need to talk to you about Marnie." Alexander hesitated. The urge to run was still screaming in his legs, but the name Marnie anchored him. He stepped into the light, a wrench gripped tightly in his right hand. "There's no Alexander here," he rasped, his voice rough. "Name's Jack." "Cut the crap, Mr. Daugherty," Elena said, her tone brisk but not unkind. "I know who you are. I know about the warrant. I know about the PFA. I also know that your ex-wife is currently trying to defraud my company out of $50,000 using the same talent for fiction she used on you." Alexander lowered the wrench slightly. "What do you want?" I want the truth, Elena said. She reached into her bag. Alexander tensed, but she only pulled out a file folder. She tossed it onto the workbench between them. She claims she was driving a truck during an accident. Physics says she wasn't. She's lying to protect her new husband, Rick Ballantyne. Alexander looked at the folder. Rick, the man in the Silverado, the man who had taken his life. Why should I care? Alexander asked bitterly. I'm safe here. You leave, I disappear. I'm good at it. Are you? Elena challenged. I found you in 3 hours with a facial recognition algorithm. If I found you, the police will find you eventually. And when they do, you go to prison for fleeing. But if you come with me, if you testify to her pattern of perjury, we can blow her credibility out of the water. The district attorney in Pennsylvania hates being played. If we prove she lied then, and she's lying now, your warrant gets recalled. You get your name back. And if you're wrong, then you're no worse off than you are right now, hunted and hiding in a freezer. Elena stepped closer, her eyes hard. She destroyed you, Alexander. She took your house, your reputation, and your freedom. Now she's doing it again. Are you going to let her keep winning, or are you going to finish the fight? Alexander looked down at his hands. The grease, the scars, the dirt. He looked around the shed that belonged to another man, at the life that wasn't really his. He was tired of being a ghost. He was tired of the silence. He dropped the wrench on the metal table. It landed with a heavy final clang. I can't go back in handcuffs, he said quietly. You won't, Elena promised. You're going back as my witness. Alexander walked to the window and looked out at the white emptiness of the plains. He thought of Marnie's smirk in the courtroom. He thought of the lie that had stolen 2 years of his life. Let me get my coat, Alexander said. The conference room on the 30th floor was a cage of glass and polished mahogany. A video camera on a tripod hummed softly, its red light blinking, an unblinking eye recording every twitch of Marnie Ballantyne's face. Marnie sat at the head of the table, flanked by a bored-looking strip mall lawyer she had hired with the last of her credit limit. She looked thin. The stress of the insurance investigation and Rick's spiraling debts had carved hollows into her cheeks. Elena Vance sat opposite her, a stack of files arranged with surgical precision on the table. Mrs. Ballantyne, Elena said, her voice pleasant but cold. Let's review your statement one last time. You claim you were driving the Silverado at 2:30 a.m. You claim you were alone. You claim you swerved to avoid a deer. I've told you this a dozen times, Marnie snapped, her fingers twisting a gold ring on her hand. Why are we still here? Because, Elena said, opening a laptop, we recovered the telematics data from the truck, and we recovered the GPS data from your cell phone. At 2:30 a.m., your phone was stationary at your residence. It didn't move until 2:45 a.m., 15 minutes after the crash occurred. Marnie's lawyer straightened up. Objection. You can't prove who was holding the phone. True, Elena conceded, but we can prove who was holding the steering wheel. DNA from the airbag deployment came back this morning. It matches your husband, Rick Ballantyne, not you. Marnie went pale. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Here is your dilemma, Marnie, Elena continued, leaning forward. You filed a sworn statement to the police and the insurance company. That's insurance fraud. That's a felony. Unless you were coerced, unless you have a habit of filing false reports to manipulate the legal system. I didn't, Marnie stammered. Because we looked into your past, Elena said. We looked into the PFA you filed against your ex-husband, Alexander Daugherty. You testified he was attacking you at 7:15 p.m. on November 12th. But we found a credit card transaction for gas at a Sheet station 5 miles away at 7:10 p.m. You weren't even home, Marnie. You were buying a lottery ticket while you claimed you were fighting for your life. Marnie's eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for an excuse. That's ancient history. You can't bring that up. I can, Elena said, especially when I have a witness to establish your pattern of perjury. Elena nodded to the heavy oak door at the back of the room. It opened. Alexander walked in. He wasn't wearing the grease-stained coveralls of a mechanic. He wore a clean flannel shirt and dark jeans. He looked solid, real. He walked to the end of the table and stood there, his hands resting calmly at his sides. Marnie made a sound, a choked, strangled gasp. She recoiled in her chair as if she had seen a corpse rise from the grave. "No," she whispered. "You're gone. You ran." "I stopped running," Alexander said. His voice was deep, steady, filling the room. He didn't yell. He didn't look angry. He looked at her with a profound, pitying exhaustion. "I'm done hiding for crimes I didn't commit, Marnie." "This is an ambush," Marnie's lawyer shouted, standing up. "This is the truth," Elena countered calmly. "Marnie, if you admit right now that you lied about the accident to protect Rick, we might not press maximum charges for the fraud. But you have to go on record. Did you lie to the police?" Marnie looked at Rick's empty chair. She looked at the camera. Then she looked at Alexander. She saw the man she had thrown away, the man who had built her a home she let rot. She realized with terrifying clarity that Rick wasn't coming to save her. Rick was probably at a bar, spending money he didn't have. She crumbled. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a collapse. She slumped forward, putting her head in her hands. "Rick was driving," she sobbed into the table. "He made me say it. He said we'd lose everything." "And Alexander?" Elena pressed. "Did he hit you?" Marnie didn't look up. She just shook her head, a slow, defeated motion. "No, I just wanted the house. I just wanted him gone." The court reporter's fingers flew across the steno machine, capturing every syllable. The red light on the camera didn't blink. It burned. Alexander watched her for a moment longer. He waited for the anger to come, but it didn't. There was only relief, a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in 2 years. The chains were gone. He turned to Elena. "Are we done?" "We're done, Alexander," Elena said softly. "You're free to go." Alexander Doherty turned his back on his ex-wife. He walked out of the conference room, down the long corridor, and pushed open the heavy glass doors of the building. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was cold and crisp, smelling of wet pavement and exhaust. But to Alexander, it smelled like oxygen. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs. He walked toward the street, hailed a cab, and didn't look back. The city was loud, chaotic, and alive. And for the first time in a long time, so was he,